Hello lovely people, welcome to my Path or Pantheon wrap-up.
Sophie Vlogs.
This is a readathon that is run by Mistake Reads. I will link to them down below because I always love taking part in their readathons. I chose the Path of the Underworld. I'm filming this during the July heatwave, so I'm going to just dive straight into it because I am melting. So the first prompt for the Underworld Path was Hades, which was read the first book in a series. I read The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. I really loved this. It was very interesting reading this because this was, I think, her debut book published. This is a fantasy series. We follow Yane Dar. She's come to the City of Sky because she was summoned by her grandfather who rules over it. And Sky sort of is one of the 100,000 kingdoms, but it rules the others kind of based on the power of this god. Yen has been summoned because she is his granddaughter. Her mother sort of was cast out when she married Yen's father, so she has grown up in a different kingdom and is very much an outsider to this place, but she's summoned there and her grandfather names her as one of his potential heirs. And then she's sort of in this interesting situation of having to survive. She has two cousins who are also named as heirs, and only one of them can be the heir, and it's all very cutthroat. And then amidst all of this, there is also this grand scale story happening involving gods. And essentially there were originally these three, and one of them has been destroyed by our god in charge. The other gods have been shackled, essentially. And so that's kind of all I can tell you. This is one of those books where it's it really develops as it goes on. You're in the same situation to Yena, where you're figuring out what's happening, and it becomes aware all of these different factions and threads and that kind of thing. I really enjoyed this. I didn't love this as much as the 5th season, but I think that it was so interesting to see N.K. Jemisin sort of debut writing. There are although they are different genres, so the 5th season and the Broken Earth trilogy are very much more have more science fiction elements. This is very much more fantasy with these gods and everything like that. There's also a bit more of a kind of romance kind of aspect to this, although in an interesting way. But I still felt like there were, at its core, these similar ideas that are being explored, especially to do with power, absolutely. So in many ways, obviously you can read this without having read the 5th season. It's just having started there and now coming to her earlier work. There are obviously these topics that she is interested in unpacking and exploring, and it is very interesting to kind of compare the differences between these two portrayals, but then the threads that kind of run throughout. I am a real sucker for any of these stories where it's gods and this grand divine scale combined with this intensely personal mortal scale. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking of A Spark of White Fire by Sangu Mandana, which I gave 5 stars to. I gave this one 4 stars, but I gave 5 stars to that book because it beautifully married up that sort of political machinations, macro level divine conflict with micro level human emotional conflict and that kind of thing. I found Yane's continual return to her mother really interesting as well. This woman who when this starts, her mother has passed away, and this returning to try and figure out who her mother was. This woman that she felt like she knew, but then she arrives in this place and there is this different understanding of who this person is. There's a very human aspect of recognizing your parents as individuals who have lives without you, who existed before you existed and may have been different, and how that kind of ties into her grief. I was also really interested in Yane's continual loyalty to where she is from. There is this conflicting claim upon her. In Dar, she's an outsider because of her mother's lineage, and then in Sky, she's an outsider because of her father's lineage, but actually the strengths that she's able to draw from those. The final thing I will say, there is a god in this who is largely in the form of a child, and I loved that character. That character was one of my faves. I essentially, I've come out of this, I am reaffirmed in my knowledge that anything N.K. Jemisin writes, I want to read it. Even if there were aspects of this that didn't 100% work for me, I think her concepts are so interesting to me. I love the way she writes and executes things. She has such a voice that I just find to be so unique and interesting to read. And I'm definitely continuing the series. I own the series. It was absolutely fantastic. The next prompt was Hell, which was to read a book with two perspectives. I read a book on my Kindle, and that was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. I gave it 5 stars because I just thought it was brilliant. The two perspectives in this are Camino, who lives in the Dominican Republic, and Yahaira, who lives in America. They don't know that they're half-sisters. They only discover this through when the plane that their father is on going to the Dominican Republic crashes, and it is through that tragedy that they discover that each other exists. This was a book that I just really found myself captured in. Because it's a novel in verse, it does read very quickly. I just let myself get swept away by it. Because there is this central point that is the death of their father, there is a lot of exploration of grief in this book that I just found very moving, and I really connected to, like, the different ways people process grief. The real thing that I found compelling in many ways about this is, like, the father who, by the very nature of the setup of this book, is so absent. You only really get a sense of who he was through his daughters and other characters talking about him. And you very much get the sense of a man who was not a very good husband, but who was a good father to his daughters. And it made me think of, not based on style or anything, but in this sort of like exploration of a flawed but understandable character, it made me think of Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo, just in the way that, like, both Barry in that book and their father in this book, they do things that have ramifications upon other people's lives. They hurt their loved ones, but you also have an understanding of who they are, the type of person they are, as well as how they've been shaped by their culture and their age and expectations of what they should do. Like, you really get the sense in this that, you know, their dad was trying to do what he felt he was supposed to do whilst also doing what made him happy. It's just that then that had all these ramifications on everyone else's lives. And so they're not only dealing with this messy grief topic, but grief while also processing anger at the person who is gone. And that is such a complicated, messy topic, but I felt like it was handled so well. I really, like, connected to that. I also found it really interesting comparing the sisters. You know, you are, by the nature of, like, the narrative setup of switching between them, you are supposed to compare their lives. And, like, the situations in which they find out about their father's loss, like, let's compare support systems in place and, like, that kind of thing. I found it hugely readable. I just thought it was so well done when I finished it that I gave it 5 stars, just because I don't know what else I could have wanted it to do. I think it did some really great things. I definitely think it might be one that would be interesting to reread, actually, just because of I don't know, knowledge of how things play out. I might be able to pay attention to different things if I read it again. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fab. The next prompt was Osiris, a book with a green cover. For that, I read Inkheart by Cornelia Funke. This was interesting to read because I have heard about this book, and I definitely watched the film when it came out. But I now know that the film is quite different to the book. So I think my expectations of what was going to happen, it was interesting comparing it to what the book actually is. This follows Maggie, who loves stories. Her father is like a book doctor, I think they refer to it as. Like, he repairs books, he rebinds them, he looks after them. They're very much a family who love books and stories, but her father never reads aloud to her. And that is because sometimes when he reads aloud, the people from the books come into our world. And so one day, a stranger knocks on their door, and then their life is changed. They are forced to flee, and sort of like that kind of thing. This was fine. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. I really wanted to love this. I think it was a bit overlong for me. I personally felt like it could have been edited, and it was a bit darker than I had expected it to be. And I'm not a person who's like, there must be no darkness in children's stories. Like, some of my favourite children's stories play with darkness in some ways, and these topics that you might think are a bit heavy. It just didn't wholly work for me for this book. And I do think that is kind of, I expected it to be a bit more magical, and I think that is partly where this expectation of like my dim memories of the film potentially worked against me, because in the film I remember there being like a lot of magic to this like reading things out of the book element, whereas in this there's a lot of like they're traveling to this place, they're at that place, they get captured by these guys, they try and escape from these guys. They have some shenanigans, and then they get captured again. I just felt like there was a lot of like being captured, being like, I don't know. Essentially, I do know that this is very loved by a lot of people, and I do wonder if I had read it when I was younger, if I would have loved it also. Reading it as the type of reader I am now, it was just a bit overlong, and I got a bit frustrated at times because I wanted things to like hop along a bit faster. I did like aspects of it. There is such a love of reading that runs throughout this. At the starts of chapters there were like little tiny quotations, and I did find that quite fun to sort of like set the mood and tone for like what this chapter will be. I thought Dustfinger was an interesting character. I thought there was a lot that I liked about this. I don't know if I like it enough to continue the series. I'm gonna sit on it because it might be. The second book does sound interesting. I guess I would love to hear from you if you've read this series. Do you think I would like the second book? Is it worth continuing? Because I enjoyed it enough that I would potentially read it. I'm just not sure if it's going to be a priority. The next prompt was Izanami, which was a book set on an island. I read another book on my Kindle. I read The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I forgot when I was doing my TBR that I have read H.G. Wells before. I read The War of the Worlds, and I did quite like it. I think I had a similar experience with this one. The Island of Dr. Moreau, like our main character essentially ends up shipwrecked. He kind of gets like saved by these guys. He ends up on this island of Dr. Moreau. Essentially, like Dr. Moreau and his assistants are like doing experiments which are creating these like animals who have sort of been turned into humans in some ways, insofar as they like resemble humans as much as they can, but they're still very much like this other figure. It's one of those where I understand why it's become a classic, and like I think partly if I didn't actually already, because of it having seeped into culture, have an idea of what happens, I would potentially have liked it more, because I would have felt a lot tenser. I don't know, the narrative, the way that the narrative is done is that it is a tale that is being recounted by the person, so I kind of knew that the person would be okay, because they have to be in order to tell this story, and I do wonder if it was told in a different manner, if I wasn't sure whether they were going to be okay, whether that would have also added some tenseness. There were moments in this where I was like super tense. Like there are moments, especially when he is first on the island and he's being like stalked by a creature and he doesn't know what it is and it's like following him. That was really great. And there were like interesting ideas and discussions to do with like science and like the role of and like progress and like what does that mean and is this morally wrong, blah blah blah. I didn't hate this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars again because I thought it was fine. I do think it is one that if I hadn't already had as much cultural awareness as I do have of it, I might have liked it a bit more. My final prompt was Aloran, main character creates something. I gave myself a couple of options for this one, but I ended up going for On the Come Up by Angie Thomas. This is my first Angie Thomas, and I really enjoyed it. This follows Bree, who is 16 years old. She wants to be a rap artist. Her family are really struggling financially, so she feels like a lot of pressure to help and provide and that kind of thing. So she ends up creating a song called On the Come Up, but also she has, at her school, there is an incident where some of the security guards like throw her to the ground, and it's recorded, and there's a lot of this that is to do with people's ideas of who Bree is, whether that is people who know her having an idea of who she is and whether or not she's meeting that idea, or society as a whole and the expectations we place upon black people, specifically black girls who live in places like the places that Bree lives in. All of these expectations, and I found there was a really interesting discussion about how do you make it in this industry that wants to like categorize you in certain ways. Like people want to categorize Bree as like one specific type of person, and they don't want to take her as a nuanced human That kind of thing. And sometimes Brie leans into it, and sometimes she doesn't want to lean into it. And I felt like it did such an interesting discussion of those sorts of topics. I don't listen to rap music, and I don't really know rap music very well, but I did really enjoy the insight into Brie's composition process, like the sort of like stream of consciousness bit you get when you're in her head and she's thinking of words that rhyme and how, oh, this concept would need to follow something else and that kind of thing, and just sort of like seeing how she builds and structures music was really interesting, especially as someone who I don't really know a lot about that world. So again, when she is doing rap battles and stuff like that, that was just really interesting for me as a person who doesn't know a lot about that kind of thing. I would definitely read more Angie Thomas in the future. I'm glad to have read my first one. So yes, that is everything I read for this readathon. I've had a lovely time, I think. Even the books that I gave 3 stars to, for me 3 stars is a good rating, they have also made me think, and I have been thinking about the reasons why I've been rating things a certain way and that kind of thing. But I had a really fun time taking part, as I always do with Miss Tape Reads readathons. I would love to hear if you took part in the readathon, what was your favourite book you read, have you read any of these, would you like to have chats about them, all of that and more. Please do feel free to leave comments down below, I'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, I shall call it a day and I shall speak to you next time for something different.